Night weighed upon Dragonstone like a sheet of hammered iron, its edges rasping on the sea. The waves came black and slow out of the dark, climbing the shore with a hiss like the drawing of a long blade, and the wind moved through the teeth of the island's cliffs, moaning in the gullies that cut them. Men said the castle had been raised by dragonfire before memory, every tower shaped like a claw or wing or horn. And on such a night that sounded less a tale than a confession. The keeps and halls crouched over the surf, in crouched readiness, their faces seamed with old salt. Lanterns burned low behind slit windows. The great hall's doors were barred. On the outer wall, the sentries drew their cloaks tighter and leaned into the gusts, praying to whatever gods could hear that the sky would keep to clouds. Sir Davos Seaworth stood with a hand upon the frozen parapet and watched the horizon where water met unlit air. He had stood upon deck rails in worse seas, stared at storm edges and the green fire of madness. Yet something about the night made him think of closed ledgers and unfinished tallies. That was the onion smuggler in him, who preferred accounts that balanced and cargoes that carried profit, even if the coin to be won was justice and the cargo men's lives. The gulls were gone to their crags. The tide moved sluggishly as if reluctant to press its face to Dragonstone's basalt. And yet he could smell pitch on the wind that did not come from their own cauldrons, a thread of tar and unfamiliar smoke. A traveling scent poured between waves, like the oily sheen that follows a burnt ship. Another watch, said the man beside him, a boy no older than Davos Lamprite had been, when Davos still had all his sons. Reckon we'll see nothing. You may reckon it, Davos said mildly. You may even pray it, but keep your eyes open while you do. The boy quieted. Davos leaned forward, peering, and saw it then. Not a blaze, not the flares that heralded invasion, but a sequence of intermittent glows drifting low upon the sea, as if someone had painted fire upon moving water with a soft hand. Then, farther off, a lantern blinked twice, and again the rhythm too measured for a fisherman's halloo, too patient for some renegade's luck. Davos felt his mouth go dry. Bells, he said to the boy, and the boy startled. Go. Rouse them, Doti. Within heartbeats, the great bell began to swing in its cage. Its voice shook the narrow yard and tumbled down the inner stairs, a somber boom that lived in the stones of the curtain wall. More bells woke, smaller, higher, the sound disordered by wind, so that it seemed to come from different corners of the castle at once. Torches sprang up like foxfire to pick out the paths. Men ran with their heads lowered against the gusts, boots striking flint sparks from the steps. Davos did not run. He had lived too long with fear to let it set his pace now. He descended through a postern and crossed the wet cobbles of the yard to the great hall. The guards before its doors stepped aside as he approached and opened for him. The hall was a long cavern of gloom, its roof vaulting overhead in black ribs, like a stranded whale's, with cressets burning in iron cages along the walls. The great carved table dominated the middle space, a map of Westeros cut from dark heartwood, the spine of the land rising under your palm if you ran it from Dorne to the neck, the crowns of the mountains caught forever in a carver's trick. At its far edge stood a man in plain wool, black hair threaded with gray like smoke and coal, the face lean and hard as a knuckle struck too often on iron. Stannis Baratheon turned as Davos entered, and for a moment, in the flicker of a torch, the Onion Knight saw him as he had been on deck before the Blackwater. Jaw tight, eyes refusing to blink at a horizon he meant to conquer by will. That Stannis had been dealt a ruinous defeat. This Stannis wore defeat as other men wear cloaks, a garment that sheltered him never, but must be carried because no other would do. My lord, Davos said, bowing with the simplicity of long practice. A fleet to seaward, not ours. How many? In this dark, I cannot yet say. More than traders, fewer than a great line. Their signals are... He hesitated. He had never seen that particular language of lights. Stannis did not mistake him. Strange. I can smell their pitch. I could smell it in my sleep. He put a hand to the table's edge as if the grain's riches might steady him. Melisandre spoke of fire upon water. She speaks of much, Davos said before he could bridle the words. He wasn't sorry when Stannis' mouth tightened. That, too, was part of his bargain with truth. "Shall I order the scorpions armed?" "Arm them," Stannis said, "and send to wake the queen." She was already coming. The doors at the hall's far end opened, and Selyse Florent entered with her stiff step, and her face arranged like an altar. Bright with fervor, empty of doubt. The Red Woman walked beside her, the silk of her gown uninterested in the wind that crept even here through the stone. Melisandre seemed to make her own weather. The torches leaned toward her when she passed, and Davos felt their heat on his face spike without smoke. Her eyes were the red of banked coals, and Davos had never decided if they looked out or inward. "The night is in travail," Melisandre said, and smiled for Stannis as for a pupil who had returned to his lesson. "A child is on the water." "Ships," Stannis said. "Not prophecy. Prophecy is a ship if you know how to sail her." Davos lowered his eyes to the carved shore of Blackwater Bay, and thought of green fire leaping like serpents over waves. Stannis caught his glance. "I know what you think," he said. "Ay," said Davos. "You do. And yet a fleet is a fleet. Another of the usurpers, the lions, Tyrell roses come late to lose their petals on my wall?" Selyse sniffed. The sound thin. "We should stoke the braziers on the heights. Let them come to judgment." Melisandre's gaze drifted beyond them, as if she read script written in the air. "Not lions. Not roses. Fire, yes. But it is not the fire of the false sword." "Then? Betty?" Stannis' hand tapped the edge of the table on the place where Dragonstone bulged into the narrow sea. "A habit now. A signal of thought much as men pace." His knuckles were knotted with long work, the nails cut brutally short. "Davos," he said, "take men to the sea tower. When they're close enough to count, I want the count. If they show banners, note them. If they hail, answer. If they do not..." He did not need to finish. There were signals, there were missiles, and in between was the space where men decided. Davos bowed and went. The stair up the sea tower's spine was narrow and wet. The stone sweated here. He emerged near the top into wind that made his cloak kick and stumble like a drunk behind him. The sea lay beneath, black and moving as if it carried some slow, vast animal asleep. And upon it, yes, more lanterns now, and flags stiff in the gusts. A high, thin sound ran across the water then. Not a horn, not a whistle, not a gull. The hairs rose along his arms. He looked up instinctively and caught a shape passing the moon like a stain upon a sheet. Immense wings, a long, lashing tail, a head like a spear crowned with spines. It moved with a certainty no storm could teach and folded upon itself to stoop low over the waves, the spray breaking misty across scales that were black, where they should have been all reflection. "Mother of God," the boy beside him whispered, and then louder, abandoning pretense of any prayer he had meant to say. "Mother..." "Hold," Davos said, his own breath gone shallow. He could see the ships better now, lean and low, with figureheads that were not the bulge-eyed maidens he knew from Pentoshi craft, nor the fat seal prows of Bravos. These had prows shaped like dragon snouts, teeth carved where steel rammeted wood. On their masts hung banners that bent, shook, righted, black fields charged with a red three-headed dragon, the device the singers never let die. Targaryen. The word was a rock falling through him. He tasted salt. He thought of Robert's fist smashing a table, calling dragon spawn by filthier names, and of Lord Stannis' stare when he said the words law, right, crown. He thought too of this island's bones. The gargoyles hung off the parapets like frozen sentinels. The very hearths here were dragon-mawed. It was as if the castle itself had lifted its head from long sleep, and seeing the banner, opened an eye. The great black beast above beat its wings once, twice, and the wind from it knocked men against the crenels. A second shape followed after it like a dart of shadow. Smaller, sleeker, with a body the color of old bronze hammered thin. The third set of wings was pale as milk poured over stone in moonlight. Dirty. Davos' heart kept count like a drum. He had heard rumors, of course. A girl in foreign cities buying eunuchs with dragonfire. breaking chains with dragons, but such tales could be carried like pretty shells across an ocean. He had not expected the shells would crack, and the creatures inside arrive on this very night. "What flag do we hoist?" the boy gasped. "Ours," Davos said automatically, and then more firmly, "Ours and only ours." And the king's words the same. "There will be no first folly tonight." By the time Davos brought the count and the true report of banners to the great hall, the castle was a shivering box of whispers. Men on the stairs turned their eyes down when he passed, as if afraid to look at him, and turned to salt. He thought of Seaworth's sons, all but one given to the water, and told himself the sensation in his chest was not fear but adjustment, the marrow finding how to hold a new weight. Stannis stood where Davos had left him, though a brazier had been brought near, and a servant was adding coals, scraping the grate with an iron rod, so that sparks jumped like bees. Melisandre had moved closer to the king. Selysa stood even stiffer, if that were possible. Beyond them, in the shadows, Davos glimpsed a small figure with hair like dried straw, and a touch of shadow along one cheek. Princess Shireen, peering round the immensity of the table, as if it were an island she had not finished mapping. "Targaryen," Davos said, and bowed. Banners enough to put name to tail. 3 dragons by the side. "Bam." "3," said Melisandre, satisfaction rising on the word like heat. Stannis did not change, precisely, but a thing in him stilled, as if a pendulum that had been swinging in his chest paused mid-arc. He said. "They would make sure we saw. If she means parley, she will ask it at my door, not shout it from the water." "Then, that height," Selysa said, her mouth small. Did the beast? Did they breathe upon us?" "No," Davos said. "I think they wear their fire as a man wears his best cloak before receiving guests. To remind," Stannis' lip curled, "I do not dress to impress guests." He tore his gaze from the door as if tearing flesh. "They want the castle. They will want the rightful place returned. They will say it was stolen." Selysa's eyes shone. Hairline sinned, but Rhaelor takes what offerings please him. "If the Red God sent her." "The Red God sent nothing," Davos said, hearing the edge in his own voice and unable to file it smooth. "Ships and dragons do not appear by favor alone. They have long oars and longer intentions." "Nah." Melisandre turned her head toward him. Her look was not contemptuous. It was merely the way one looks at smoke to see which way it turns. "The fire spoke of this night," she said softly. "A woman with the sea's breath in her hair and fire sleeping at her feet. A stone seat waiting the return of its inheritor. And a man of iron too, with law for blood. Fire and stone. Stone and fire. 2 walls keeping darkness out, unless they quarrel and fall. Ben, your fires speak in riddles to leave you free to claim you spoke true after," Davos said. "With respect. Always with respect, Sir Onion." "It sweetens even bitterness," Melisandre said. "Enough," Stannis said. He rubbed at the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. "When she comes, and she will come. She will come here." His eyes passed over the table and fixed on Davos, as a hawk fixes on a fish. "It means to lift. You will stand by me." "I will, my liege." "Melisandre, you will not speak unless I command it. You will keep your eyes to yourself." She bowed her head and smiled. Yes, the king commands." Selysa's mouth worked, but shapes to her god died unspoken. Shireen slipped nearer, emboldened by some memory of Davos' kindness, and Davos knelt so his voice might reach her without crossing the whole hall. "Back to your chambers, princess. There are matters." "I know matters," she said, her small chin firm. She had one of her mother's features, and none of her mother's hardness. "I can be quiet as a mouse in a wall." "Will she bring the dragons inside, do you think?" "I do not think the doors are wide enough and the dragons not courteous enough," Davos said. And she hid a laugh in her sleeve, eyes bright. The outer doors boomed then, once, like a hurt heart. The torches rattled in their sconces. The wind came through in a clutch of salt. The doors swung open upon a knot of guards, not their own, and a woman at their head. She was not tall. That struck Davos first. Songs make queens tall, so that they can look over men's shoulders. This one would have had to stand upon a bench to gaze far in a crowd. Her hair fell in pale waves to her shoulders, a white gold that in the torchlight held hints of blue like steel and snow. Her face was narrow, the features cut clean with that high, set look old Valyrian blood made. She had a mantle clasped at the breast with a pin of 3 small twisted dragons, and beneath that mantle a dress the color of ashes and embers, neither gray nor red, but some intermediate hue that altered when she moved. She was very still. That was the second thing. She stood before Stannis Baratheon, as if she had been here always and time had only just noticed. At her right shoulder moved a thick-bodied man in a plain cloak that did not disguise the corded muscle under it. His head was shaved, and his eyes took the room in with small, controlled swivels. Behind him walked a tall knight, with a face roughened by years of sun and disgrace. His beard threaded with silver as if time had salted it. A woman with skin, the color of dark tea, and eyes that corrected the room's grammar with a glance, walked just a step behind their queen, her hands folded at her waist, and beyond them, the red and black of the banners in a diminutive. A girl bearing a long staff topped by a small dragon of metal, the wood of it painted, the metal dark. "Your Grace," Davos began, uncertain to whom he spoke. "King Stannis Baratheon," said the queen with the pale hair. Her voice was low and clear, and held the faintest trace of some foreign cadence like silt in clean water. "I am Daenerys of House Targaryen, the first of my name. I ask guest right of you and parley that we may speak with bread and salt between." Stannis' mouth hardened. "The only man who asks my guest right in this hall is my guest. The only one who demands parley is my equal. I will give both because I choose, not because you ask. Bread and salt will be served." She inclined her head a fraction. The woman with eyes like polished walnut stepped forward and spoke to a steward with authority, and the steward hurried away. The shaved-headed warrior measured distances to exits with a glance. The knight stared at the gargoyles overhead, as if they were old companions, and the girl with the staff gazed upon the carved table, as if she had been told stories of it, and now wanted to check if it had kept faith with what she'd been promised. They sat. The ritual was observed. A loaf broken, the salt cellar offered and pinched. Daenerys Targaryen ate, untroubled by the coarse crust. Stannis took his portion as if it were a penalty paid. When the forms of only murder's prevention were satisfied, he spoke without savor. "You come to my island with flags that claim my seat." "Your island," Daenerys said, as if tasting the phrase and not disliking it. "I was born here, beneath this roof, when the sea beat upon the rocks so hard the midwives thought the world would break. The winds were bad nights after, men say. The sea has a memory. Your island remembers me. Them? It remembers lords who did not demand it burn for them. That was my father," she said, and Davos saw now the line of steel that lived in her throat. "You may damn him for it if you like. I will not defend him. But I will not wear his shadow either, no more than your majesty seeks to wear your brother's drunken smile." "Never so." Stannis' hand stopped its small betraying tap upon the table and found flatness. For just a breath, his eyes acknowledged the blow, and Davos, who had spent his life around men's temper, saw the restraint it cost him to let the words pass. Melisandre's head tilted. Selysa's mouth went thin as thread. "The law is not a cloak a man puts on when wind skirts his skin and casts off when the sun returns," Stannis said. "It is what is. My brother took this castle from your house and held it by right of conquest. It was given me after, and I held it against a crown that denied me and a realm that conspired to forget its own statutes. I have bled upon these stones. That is the memory that concerns me." "No. You speak of law," Daenerys said, "and I will not quarrel with you over it this night. What is law in the mouth of men who write it? What does it make of women, or children, or those who cannot lift a spear? In the lands I have crossed, law was a scroll a master held in one hand, while his other hand closed around a girl's throat. In one city I burned the great chain that went round the harbor, and the smoke smelt of old oil and older blood. There is a law older than men's, and you know it. You stand in it when you speak of right, that is not convenience. And oh. A small sound came from Selyse's throat that might have been laugh or protest. Melisandre's eyes had never left Daenerys' face. They were not soft. They were curious. Davos glanced from one to the other and thought of wildfire again, of a flame that does not know what it eats, only that it must. I did not come in the night to quarrel about whose claim bears which stamp, Daenerys said then, a half-smile that was not quite smile passing her mouth. I came because your island is not only yours and not only mine. It is a piece upon the board, and there are others moving against us both. You may concern yourself with lions and roses, with krakens who will take advantage of storms. But I tell you this, there is a wind out of the north that is colder than any law, and it blows for us all. And no wonder. Stannis' head turned a fraction. You bring tales of snows now. Do your dragons melt them? Then I bring word, she said more evenly. From men of the free folk who crossed the sea in stolen ships, from traders who went farther north than sense, from a priest, a red priest who had eyes like embers, and spoke of a darkness that eats light. He told me there is a war the South does not yet believe in. He told me there is a prince who was promised. He spoke in riddles and in fire as your lady here does. And I am grown weary of riddles, yet some riddles move armies. He said the stone seat and the fire must be together when the night comes. Nan. Stannis made a sound low in his chest that might have been unwilling agreement, or only the ache of bones rubbed raw by repetition. He had heard such counsel already. Davos had given it to him with less fire and more salt, and from that counsel the king had drawn a turn toward the north when every other compass pointed him south. If not for the pull of the Iron Bank and the stubborn arithmetic of logistics, Davos knew Stannis would be in snow now. That he was still upon this ash-black night of an island was the result of winter's slowness and the need to clothe the naked facts of their defeat in new raiment. You spoke to a red priest? Stannis asked. I did not seek him, Daenerys said, her face unreadable. He has a gift for finding. He did not find my approval. She glanced at Melisandre then, and heat briefly met heat without either withdrawing. He died as men die. The truth in his mouth may live where his flesh does not. Melisandre's lips parted, perhaps to claim some kinship of vision, but Stannis' hand flicked and she held her peace. I know the cold you speak of, he said. I had it brought to me by a smuggler stubborn as barnacles. It is not a story I can prison in my hall and call a trespasser. The brigands at King's Landing and those who suckle them are my enemies, but they are not the only ones. If I am to be king, I will not be king of skulls. That is the sum of my choices. I go and fight, or else I am false to myself. Then Saul. Then I bring you ships, Daenerys said. I bring you soldiers who need pay in what is right. I bring you 3 beasts who will frighten even the dead, if the dead are not utterly foolish. It might have been jest. The corner of her mouth moved like a leaf in a wind. I ask of you, Dragonstone, with the respect of a child, asking for what was taken. Not this night, not by fire, but by treaty between us, so that we are not divided when division is death. The rest we will speak of in better light. I will not bend the knee to you as queen. You will not bend the knee to me as king. Let us bend them together in the snow, if the snow demands. Menderol. Davos let air out of his chest he had not known he was holding. It was a thing artful and plain together, like a good knot. Loose to the eye, impossible to tug undone. He saw 2 prides measuring, 2 natures that would not be satisfied with easy words. He thought of boys pressed flat under the weight of men's needs. He thought of the illegality of hunger. He thought of the fact that 3 dragons were better than none. What do you ask beyond a table's share? Dennis said. He did not say yes, but the word had entered the hall like a bird that had found its window open. A motion, not yet a rest. The island, Daenerys said plainly. To make it my seat while I am in the south. To call my banners here and not be threatened by you. To repair the mews that were built for dragons once and will be again. To look upon the sea my house has always looked upon, not as a beggar, but as its child. Then, and in return? Stannis' gaze sharpened until it could nick flesh. In return, she said, I swear to bear no sword against you while we both live and walk under the same sky. I swear my ships will ferry your men when needed without extortion, and my Unsullied will fight beside your men in line and die under your banner if the enemy is common. I swear that if your need becomes starvation, my stores will open before yours do. I will not hoard to watch you fail. I swear that if your cause fails in the south, I will not betray your chosen refuge in the north. And when the cold is beaten or beats us both, we will speak again. She looked down briefly at the carved river of the Trident, at the Reach's crumbly hills. We will speak again, you and I, with fewer eyes and fewer ghosts. Those were the words of a woman who had more to ask than she would ask before strangers. Nicely done, Davos thought, and wished himself back upon some deck with a wind that could be interpreted with a touch of finger and a look at canvas, not a hall full of men and women who were wines and sails both. Stannis' face could have been hewn from one of the gargoyles this easy to read. Yet Davos had spent enough time upon the man's lee, finding small eddies of warmth where other men found only a cold law, to detect the shift. Stannis had recognized something in Daenerys that spoke to him beyond banners. A discipline not rooted in courtiers' envy, perhaps, a stubbornness that could mate with his own, if not pleasantly then effectively. Bread and salt I have given you, Stannis said. You shall have lodging this night and safety upon this island. Tomorrow you will show me your dragons by day. I do not like what I cannot count. You will tell me your numbers, and I will tell you mine. You will tell me what ports you can hold, and I will tell you which I can starve. We will look upon Storm's End together and see if your beasts can do what my siege engines could not. If we find we are not liars to one another, we will scratch at the parchment and make old wrongs into new law. If I find you a liar, I will not ask my gods if they approve the remedy. Then shall. Agreed, Daenerys said. And in this closer light, Davos thought he saw something like relief wash across her face and then be washed away by the tide, leaving old stone beneath. And I will look upon your men at drill. I did not come to take what you have and spend it to make a song for myself. If we do this, it will be because we both wish to spend everything and see what we buy. Dainen? Songs will not be sung about this hall, Stannis said flatly. No one sings about accounts. Someone should. Said Daenerys. And in that moment, unexpectedly, Stannis' mouth actually bent by a finger's breadth toward humor, as if the idea of a singer attempting a hymn to rations amused him, and he had decided not to kill. Melisandre moved as soundlessly as a new flame. If your grace permits, she said, and for once to both of them, a ceremony in her address. The night is laden with signs. The prince who was promised is not always a prince. The sword that burns can be a creature. Stone, fire, fire, stone. You two were not meant to stand as walls facing one another. The darkness loves a gap. I have seen a shape cold as a crown and empty as a grave moving through snow. I have seen. You have seen what pleases your fire, Stannis snapped. You have seen me crowned 100 times in it, and I was not. Do not presume to instruct me in what I must be. She bowed her head. The fire shows truth. Its flaw is that it shows too much truth at once. Then so. Daenerys watched the red woman with a stillness that looked like frost and had more of heat in it. Inestapor, she said. A man wore smoke from his lips to make himself a magician. He made a great show of breathing it in and letting it out. I have met men with shadows who walked like men without shadows. I am glad for anyone's God who teaches them mercy. I am less glad of any God who asks men for their children. And now, something passed across Stannis' face like a cloud. Selisa stiffened, then smoothed herself. Davos said nothing because he could not speak, because he was looking at Shireen and thinking of nights when the red woman's face had been near the princess's cradle. like a torch approaching parchment. He felt that old ache behind his missing knuckles. He had not yet failed where it mattered most, but failure had long arms. Men offer what they must, Celis said with the mild smile of a martyr who has always imagined the nails. We do not ask children. The Lord of Light asks what will buy the morning. The morning is not for sale, Davos said before he could stop. And if it were, the price is not that. Melisandre's eyes took him in, weighing, but Daenerys spoke first. Where I am queen, she said it as if it were a sentence that did not need proof, because it had been proven in rooms with chains upon the walls. If a man sets fire to a child and names it worship, I will have him nailed through his wrists to the city gates, and leave him for the carrion birds. You may ask my men if this is a jest. Mamsau, Grey Worm, if that was his name. The captain with the shaven head and the great quiet did not smile. He did not do anything that could be named. He had a way of being present as a fact, as present. The knight behind Daenerys, Jorah Mormont. If Davos remembered Phillips of gossip and the shape of dishonor rightly, shifted his weight as if such talk made him long for some honest inconvenience like waves. Stannis looked at Davos then, as if recalling suddenly where the moral accounting of his life lay. The glance said, I remember your pleading. I remember your loss. I remember the smell of smoke. It was not apology. It was acknowledgement. Davos took it as one takes a loan that may yet be repaid. You will have rooms prepared, Stannis told a steward, and the steward bowed to both rulers like a reed in a margin. Put the queen below the sea tower. The rooms there are sound and the view is untroubled. Daenerys' mouth quirked again. Untroubled? She echoed, as if liking the irony. My thanks. I will keep my dragons from your roof. I do not own the roof, Stannis said. The island owns itself and suffers us upon it. But if your beasts rip the gargoyles down, my men will sweep the pieces and curse. You may tell your men to do so whether dragons rip them down or not, Daenerys said. Men for whom cursing is forbidden die sooner. When she had gone, when the hall had uncounted, and the red and black banners had been guided down the corridors with their carriers, and all that remained of the meeting was heat in the brazier, and the small smell of salt broken upon bread, Stannis remained at the table with both hands spread flat upon it, like a wrestler feeling the wood for treachery. Davos waited, because waiting had been the art of his life more than any sharper practice. You do not like her, Stannis said finally, gazing down at the Carver's Trick River that cut the reach from the Stormlands. I do not know her, said Davos. I like what she said about children. I like what she promised about ships. I do not like dragons. They do not keep books. But if they frighten the dead, I will learn to like them better. Then, Stannis' mouth twitched. You will be my man to count their cost and their use. I will count what you put before me, my liege, and I will tell you to your face if you try to spend my princess. Stannis looked up then, the iron in him pure as the metal, impure as all things men have used. If I try to spend her, he said with no poetry, cut my throat while I sleep. I am not so good with knives, Davos said. And they both found the same absurd memory then. The night Davos had tried to kill the Red Woman and failed, because he was only a smuggler taught late to Haiti, and something like a dry wave rolled between them and was gone. Beyond them, Shireen stepped out of the shadows, as if she had waited for the spell of kings to break. Father, she said. And when Stannis turned to face her, he shed years in the movement. He would not have liked to know it. He would have said years were not cloaks to be cast aside. But Davos saw it and held it as a sailor holds in his pocket a pebble from a beach where he once found rest, warmed by the sun and perfectly useless in a storm. What is it? Stannis said, not unkindly, which in him was an extravagance. May I speak to the queen? Shireen asked. Her voice was small but steady. To ask if I might see her dragons. I have a book that says they are not like birds at all. Then Deralwend. You will not go alone, Stannis said, his eyes flicking to Davos as they always did when any errand required trust that was not a soldier's. And you will stay where her men say you must stay. I will, father. She broke into a grin that made the scar upon her cheek pull, but did not make her less a child. Thank you. After she had skipped from the hall, Davos found that the smell of pitch and dragon at war had become tolerable, as if a new air had been let in. Melisandre drifted closer then like a coal rolling toward paper. Her gaze found Stannis' face with intimacy and possession and a curiosity he had not satisfied. She will bear children of fire, the Red Woman said as if marking down inventory. Her womb is tender. The match has yet to be struck. My wife stands in this hall, Stannis said, and I am a king who has no time for other men's rumors. Mark down the ships, not her womb. Your wife is a faithful flame, Melisandre said. And Selyse brightened, poor woman, only to wilt when Melisandre's attention slid away from her like a lizard from a hot stone. But you will not win the night with faithful flames only. The great fire requires great kindling. Davos spoke before his temper could harden into a thing that could not bend. Kindle yourself then, my lady, if the night needs it. Melisandre turned her red eyes upon him and smiled. I am needed for other brightnesses. She might as well have said I prefer to live. She bowed and withdrew like a dancer, stepping backward into shadow, and Stannis let her go without all the fury he might have poured once into that dismissal. He was learning a king's weariness at last, Davos thought, or else he was banking his fury like any good householder husbanding fuel for winter. The morning came gray and fast, as if it had little patience for men's nights. The sea had changed its sound. Now it lapped as if speaking under its breath. The yard below the sea tower filled with men who pretended to drill while watching the sky. Davos stood with Stannis upon the walkway before the tower's upper rooms and waited with them. He felt the island breathe beneath his boots, felt its sullen assent to this new occupation. The first dragon came sudden as an insult. It burst from behind the tower with a long roll of wing and hung in the air above them, and this time Davos could see his face. The black one, eyes like pits with a low red flicker inside, jaw scarred, horns black as later saints' hearts. Its long throat flexed, and cold clenched Davos' belly until he realized the beast was only tasting them, taking them in as a ship takes soundings. The bronze-colored one came behind, more curious, its wings thrumming with less rage. The pale one, if dragons could be called gentle, this one would be the gentler. Its gaze slid over the men like light over water. Daenerys stood upon the tower stairs with the wind in her hair and her hands upon the parapet, and looked not small at all. She was not bejeweled. She never seemed to need to be. Missandei stood behind her with a tablet and stylus, readiness itself. Mormont leaned at a distance that could be crossed in 3 long strides. Grey Worm was a presence without movement, a thing you drew in your calculations whether you wished to or no. You see them, Daenerys said over the wind to Stannis. I do not know if they frighten the dead. They frighten men, and sometimes me. Then shall. Stannis' jaw set. Everything worthwhile frightens us. Not bread, said Daenerys, and smiled a little. Not water when you are thirsty. Bread goes stale. Water drowns men by the thousands. He did not smile back. Davos breathed out. The dragons hung and breathed, and the air smelled of some mineral, as if a mine's mouth had been opened. They were not birds at all, no. They were a category for which the world had mislaid the proper word. Shireen, edging forward between Davos and a guard to see better, did not squeal as other children would have. She took in a breath that Davos heard like a knife, and turned to Daenerys with a formal little curtsy that would have pleased Selyse if it had not been given to this rival queen. Your Grace, she said, small hands pleating her sleeve. Princess, Daenerys said, and her smile altered to something quiet and oddly tender that Davos had not seen upon her face until then. This is Drogon, that is Rhaegal. The pale one is Viserion. Do you have a favorite on sight? Shireen's brow puckered. I am not allowed favorites, she said gravely. Ask Septa Colan. And then more privately, with a conspirator's flicker. But if I did, I would be ashamed to say. It might make the others sad. Dragons do not grow sad, Daenerys said. They grow angry. Sometimes they grow hungry. Sometimes they grow bored. I do not know if they can be kind. But they can be fair if you teach them to take turns. She glanced sideways at Shireen. Do you have a book about that? I have a book about everything, Shireen said. Davos brings me some that have worms in them, but I do not mind if the words inside are still there. Davos rubbed his nose, embarrassed, and Stannis' mouth made a shape like the shadow of humor again. Daenerys' eyes brushed Davos and moved on without judgment, as if she had always had to make do with books whose corners were gnawed, and did not choose to despise any man who trafficked in such. In the yard below, men shouted and pointed at the dragons and hid their faces, and shouted again. Grey Worm's men stood as they had been trained to stand, unruffled. One of Stannis' knights, a Florent, by the fox upon his tabard, crossed himself in curt motions and backed under an archway with the stubborn caution of a man who means to live very long in a world not built for his comfort. Daenerys lifted a hand. The black dragon, Drogon, tilted, wheeled, and stooped. Men ducked. Stannis did not. The beast arrested its dive within a man's length of the parapet and hovered with a shudder. The wind from its vast wings slapping at their cloaks with a sound like sails beating before a squall. Its eyes were not eyes he would have expected upon a beast. They had intent in them, something close to a man's clever impatience. It opened its mouth, and Davos saw fire not as a sheet, but as a volume, a storehouse, banked and ready, a kind of architecture within flesh. The dragon did not breathe it. It displayed it and closed it, as if to say, see what I have, that you do not. Something childish pricked in Davos then. He was a man who had once been poor and knew what it was to be looked down on. He did not like being shown someone else's wealth. He reminded himself that he had asked for a spectacle, and the gods or the queen had given him one. Stannis held his ground. He did not bow. You say you cannot tell if they are kind, he said to Daenerys. The words were steady. Davos knew how much work sat behind them, as a sailor knows the hand upon the tiller without seeing it. Can you tell if you are? I have been told often enough that I am not, Daenerys said softly, humorless now. But I try to be fair. It is the better thing if you can manage it. It means you can sleep. Kings sleep little, said Stannis. Queens less, said Daenerys, and in the air between them some exchange occurred, too small and too huge for Davos to properly name. The acknowledgement of another who had been told all her life that being just and being loved would not be allowed to share the same table, and that if forced to choose, she had chosen, as Stannis had, the harder, colder friend. When the dragons had gone to take the heights and sunned themselves upon gargoyles who had dreamed too long of living, the hall filled with men who had the same expressions men wear after a storm, ends without sinking them. Wide-eyed, suddenly very talkative, a little brave. On the painted table, small stones marked units, black pebbles for infantry, smooth bits of green glass for cavalry, carved driftwood for ships. Missandei wrote the terms they spoke with a neat hand in the common tongue, and another in Essosi letters, and Davos watched the flow of her wrist and thought that the world, in the end, belongs not to kings or dragons, but to the people who can stand very long and very steady when the kings and dragons have gone to sleep. Storm's End rose upon the map like a clenched fist. Stannis' finger tapped its top. Their garrison is Lannister red as a butcher's shop, he said. Their stores will last months. I would set a grade of siege upon it and starve them. But winter will make that grade narrower every day. If your beasts can be persuaded to accept the discipline of war and not only its sport. They have been taught to take whistles, Daenerys said. They know calls. They know to attack where I point if the wind is not against us. But I will not send them to burn men who have no choice but to be where their lords posted them. I do not use fire to write cruelty in the snow and call it necessary. Then Bowland. I do not require their fire, Stannis said, as if admitting a humility that cost him dear. Can they carry? A man, too, above a wall, to lower a rope? Can they harry a sally port without burning it? Can they break a siege from the inside as clean as a knife through cork? Then, they can do as much as they choose to share with me, Daenerys said candidly. They are not dogs, your grace. They are themselves. I am only their mother as far as a mother can be to the wind. If you wish them to be catapult stones, I will ride the black and show you how foolish a catapult stone can make princes look. Da. You will not ride within range of bolts I cannot count, Stannis said sharply. Not while I stand upon the ground you rose from. I will not have you fall and have your men blame me for the rest of my life. And so, you assume you will live to have a rest of your life, Daenerys said with a small light in her eyes that might have been relief at someone else's protectiveness, breaking the tension of pride before it ruined the day. Very well. We will attempt what I have described. And if Storm's End proves more stubborn than your complaint, we will attempt something easier to test our promise. A convoy in the Mander perhaps, or a grain fleet off the Tor. Then Chawandani. Davos leaned over the table and put a driftwood ship upon the narrow sea. Here, he said, I know a trick of currents the Tyrell captains like. If we place men at these 2 points and frighten the ships nearer with a taste of dragon rather than a meal of it, we may take them entire and feed men who would otherwise eat their boots. And it will tell your dragons their whistles again, and tell our men to keep their wits about them. When the sky is full of wing. Menshau. Stannis nodded. And it will make a small song to frighten merchants. Kings need songs only when they cannot afford them. Bencho. Your grace speaks as if songs cost, Jorah Mormont said quietly from the side of the table. His voice had the rough of the north in it, not as harsh as the north that waited. Softer, sadder. They do. But it is not always coin you spend. Sometimes it is time. Sometimes it is blood. Men love a story almost as much as they love not to be afraid. Give them one that tells them what to fear and how to stand up to it, and they will pay you back in discipline. Benshak. Stannis gave the exiled knight a look that removed 2 layers of sin from his name and left the core for another day. Very well, he said. We will test the fleet. We will test the dragons. We will keep our oaths where a man can see his bootlaces. Bendani. Nisandai's pen scraped and paused. How shall I style this pact? She asked without lifting her eyes. If it is to be read by those who care for style, style it nothing, Stannis said. Style it a list of provisions for a winter journey. Style it the accord of fire and stone, Melisandre said from the doorway. Her voice a warm knife. No, said Daenerys and Stannis at once. And Davos, who would be thinking about that small chorus at night, when his own bed was cold and his imagination too warm, looked down to hide the smile that wanted to come. When the council broke for meat, Davos walked the long drafty corridor with Jorah Mormont. They did not speak to begin. 2 men who had stood long at other men's elbows know how to move in public like ghosts that leave no prints. At last Jorah said, You are the one with the fingers gone. I am. Davos wiggled the stump of his left hand's first 3 for demonstration. The king took them kindly from me and kept my life. It was a fair trade. I sold poachers to buy perfume for a wife who hated me, Jorah said, as if they were trading rare shells. That was not a fair trade. I hope fairness will rub off if I stand in this hall long enough. He glanced sideways, the look scarred by old disappointments. Do you mean to trust her? I mean to count with her, Davos said. Trust is a bell you hang in a wind. It tells you when the air shifts, but you cannot stop the air. I will listen to the bell and lash the rigging tight. Jorah grunted. It is more than many men will give her on this side of the sea. But she will take your counting as seriously as she takes anyone's. She likes sons that add. Nanand. So does my king, Davos said. And they both looked ahead to where the corridor turned, and the day lay in a thin sheet of light through the embrasure. It was not a truce men would sing about perhaps, but it was a place where 2 hard people had set down their hard parcels and agreed not to rifle each other's contents for an hour. That was as much as men could hope for without seeing the dead walk. At sunset, the dragons went down to the strand. Davos, passing by the postern that led to the rocks, found himself drawn as if a line had been tied to his chest and paid out. The beach was the color of burnt bread. The sea washed onto it with a hiss, and the dragons left long grooves in the black grit where their tails dragged, and prints that might be mistaken for the marks a giant chicken would make, if a giant chicken could be terrified. They did not look terrifying now. They looked, absurdly, like beasts who had learned to be bored and were dealing with boredom as beasts must. The black one sprawled with his wings half open, like a sail fallen upon a deck in a windless patch. The bronze scratched the angle of its jaw on a rock, eyes half closed. The pale one tipped its talons into the surf and lifted them again, fascinated by the changing line of wet on its toes. Shireen stood with Daenerys and Missandei a little way above the tide, where the rocks broke the wind, and read from a book about Dragonbone, the words careful but sure. Daenerys leaned down to ask her a question as an equal might, and Shireen answered with a small authority that came from knowing what one knows in a world that respects knowing very little. Missandei listened with the grave patience of the truly clever. She would be making a map of this conversation in her head, Davos knew, and positioning each piece on her little board where it could do most good later. The sound of boots on rock behind Davos made him half turn. Stannis had come without guards. His cloak moved in the wind. He looked at the dragons as a man looks at a set of scales he means to use for a long time, suspicious of tricks, resigned to their necessity. When the black one turned its head and opened one yellow eye with a lambent slit into their world, Stannis did not shift. He did not even square himself to face it. He did what kings do who have little patience with pageants. He stood. "You will tell me the instant Melisandre goes hunting shadows," he said, eyes on the dragon. "I do not think the Targaryen girl will tolerate it. I do not think I will either, and between the two of us, one of us should be king enough to be obeyed." "I will tell you," Davos said. The wind cut his words thin, but the promise was thick enough to stand for itself. "Good." Stannis was silent a time. The sun slid down like a coin disappearing between fingers. "You once told me that truth is a poor swordsman, but a stubborn one. I have said a number of stupid things, my liege." It was not stupid. Stannis looked down at where the bronze dragon had traced a half circle in the sand, by some instinct of pattern. "I will need truth close to hand with that girl in the castle. And with you. With all of us. See to it. Nenati. I always try. Try harder." Stannis turned to go, his face already settling into the frown he wore for men in mourning and meals. "The sea is going to be full of men who want bread. Make the ship list again. I want to know which are still loyal, which are hungry, which are afraid. The hungry break less easy than the afraid." Davos bowed his head. "Aye, my king." He watched him back toward the tower. He looked out at the water where the pale dragon had lifted its head to watch a gull cut the air, then feinted to catch it, and missed by the neat, merciful measure of an inch. The gull screamed its offense to the evening and went on. Davos thought of a knot of lanterns upon Blackwater, of a woman whose pride did not hiss but cut, of a king who had learned that law must sometimes be carried like a burden instead of worn like a crown. He thought of the north, of a wall he had never seen but whose cold he had felt through other men's bones. The sea hauled itself up and went down again. The dragons scraped their tails through the sand, and the girl with the grayscale scar upon her cheek turned a page and read on. That night, Dragonstone dreamed. Men said so in the morning, laughing at themselves. They said they had heard old noises in the walls, had felt heat under their feet as if the island's heart had stirred. They ate bread with gritty mouths and salted meat and pretended not to be afraid. They tried to stand a little straighter when Unsullied passed, and the Unsullied pretended not to know. They were being measured. Selisa prayed at her shrine and refused to look at the place upon the floor where, long ago, ash had been swept and never truly gone. Melisandre watched the fire consume a small offering, the last of the dried driftwood wreaths the villagers had fixated upon when the winter first threatened their patience, and saw in the curling of smoke shapes that pleased her enough to practice smiling. Missandei sat in a small chamber off the great hall and copied the turns of that day into neat columns in 2 scripts for 2 worlds. And when she had finished, she drew a little line between 2 words and made it longer so that it might never be mistaken for a break. Jorah Mormont oiled his old sword and looked at its plain steel and thought of another sword once offered him that had burned too hot for hands like his. Grey Worm walked the walls and counted battlements and the pace between them, and when he had finished, he counted again. And Daenerys? She slept on sheets that smelt faintly of salt and very faintly of smoke. and before the sleep took her entirely. Listen to the sea reach for the shore and fall back. Reach and fall. The sound like the breath of some patient, terrible animal. She lay alone. She dreamed that she stood in the painted hall with her hands upon the carved river and felt it flowing under her palms for true. She dreamed that she stood in a field of snow and heard the beat of dragon wings, not above, not behind, but level with her breath. She dreamed that a king who had never liked songs placed a weight upon her palm, a weight as small as a pebble and as heavy as a vow, and turned her because he had. She rose before dawn and went to the battlements to watch the light unsheathe the island. Stannis was there already, of course, a dark figure with his face turned toward a north he had not yet earned. They did not speak for a long time. When they did, the words were sparse as salt and as necessary. "Tomorrow," Stannis said without preface, "we attempt the Mander. After, storm's end, if men and dragons and weather permit." "Men shy." "After," Daenerys said, "and after that, we will see what else wants taking." "After that," said Stannis, "we will see if the cold has found us yet. It is a diligent thing. It does not lose men once it has the scent." "Then let us be more diligent still," said Daenerys. They stood together with the wind pulling at their cloaks and watched the sea become a sheet of beaten copper under a pale sun. And below them men woke and cursed and laughed and sharpened what they had. The gargoyles wore their dragon guests with what looked like grudging pride. Somewhere, a bell rang to tell the hour that did not need telling. The day had already begun when the night arrived, uninvited as ever, but with guest right paid in bread and salt and dragons. And Dragonstone, old and black and patient, kept its counsel and watched the new tale begin where the old tales had left off. Dawn thinned the horizon to a smear of pewter and cold brass. In the yards, breath smoked from men like torches that had forgotten to burn. The gulls were up again, their voices like coins shaken in a cracked box. Davos had slept a short watch and woken with the taste of tar behind his teeth. He had a chart unrolled upon a trestle and a cup of small beer to keep his hands from doing something fidgeting and unseemly. The moon pulled hard last night, he told the 4 captains from their side and 3 of Daenerys from hers. "Shall be lazy this morning. The current sets east along this stretch." His finger traced the curl of coast beyond Dorne's jut. "Until the Tor, and there it turns abrupt and takes the inattentive onto the shoals, like a nurse leading a drunk. We're not inattentive. Now." The men from Essos listened like stone, listening to rain. Patient, expressionless, absorbing. The tallest of them had a scar that cut from ear to clavicle like a stitch the gods had forgotten to finish. He spoke little. When he did, his comment came out like a man weaving a rope from 2 cords and making something that could still pull a load. "You will make the signal," the scarred man said in his mild, rasping way. "Our oars will keep time. Your galleys go in the lee, with the dragon wind under." "Dragon wind," Davos repeated, and allowed himself a smile. That'll be something for your sons to tell lies about to their sons. I rode with a gust from a beast's wing in my back. They'll make your arms longer in the telling." They will not have sons," said Grey Worm from the doorway without malice, as if correcting a sum. He stepped into the pale light, helm under one arm, the other hand lax at his side. "But they will have the story." "This is good." "It is," Davos said. He had learned to keep his eyes level with the captains, and not let pity show through like damp. "See your men have salt and water. I won't have any of them dizzy when the whistles go. We'll cut this like crust and keep the loaf." Stannis came then, cloak thrown back, head bare to cold. His hair clung damp to his skull. He had the look of a man who had walked the length of a night with numbers. "You have your currents," he said without preface. "And your men? I have 8 galleys that can keep time and 30 longboats that can cut tight turns once we ask them to earn their pay. The rest will spook." "I use the 8 and the 30, Davos said. "The rest I'll keep in a spread eagle behind to catch what slips the net. We want ships, not burned wood." "We want food," Stannis said. Don't come home with pretty empty sails. Nisande entered with a small slate hung from a ribbon and a bundle of sticks under her arm, as if she were attending a lesson and had been told to be neat for the master. May I stand to hear the signals once more? She asked. I will repeat them to the hornmen. You can stand anywhere you like, Davos said. Genuine warmth softening the salt behind his eyes. We've 3 horns for 3 companies, and whistles for the dragon's calls. No one sounds anything without the right flag shown with it. And if one man sounds something wrong, I'll have his horn down his throat and his fingers tied to it to remind him there's a cost to being clever at the wrong moment. That is an expensive lesson, Missandei said without a smile. And yet something about the way her eyes dipped made Davos feel she had filed the joke with its proper docket and might take it down if needed. And me. Said Jorah Mormont, leaning a shoulder against the doorpost as if the castle's stones were a tree he had paused beneath. You'll want a man with long arms to show you how Essosi rigging minds. I want a man who keeps his head when men start praying too loud, Davos said. You can be that man or find me one. Don't make it both. And they went down to the strand under a strip of light that had not yet made an honest day of itself. The dragons were moving already, the black lifting off with a scuff of claw that left 3 trenches in the wet grit, the bronze flinging sand from a back kick of its foot, like a boy who cannot not dirty his shins. The pale one rising slow and indifferent, every 3rd wing beat longer than the other 2, as if counting its own strength. Every 3rd wing beat longer than the other 2, as if counting its own. Daenerys stood a little apart, with the wind drawing her hair back, as if trying to teach it something. There was no crown upon her head. She seemed to make men treat her as if she wore one through force of expectation alone, an exercise Stannis would have recognized if he ever recognized anything under that name. Ready? She asked Davos. Ace ready as we get before the first mistake, he said. Your Grace. She nodded, and went to put her hand upon the black dragon's muscled neck. Do not burn grain, she told him as if warning a child not to let supper fall on the floor. Do not burn men who lower their flags. Do not burn boats we need. If you are bored, open your mouth and frighten them a little. The beast blinked and made the sound that was like boulders shifting. And Davos, who had watched captains speak to their clever dogs and their laziest mates, found the familiarity disorienting. He wondered what a ship would be like that you could talk to in a stable and ask not to eat. They went by 2s and 3s to the boats and took their seats. Oars dipped. The slick black of dragon shadow moved over them and over the water in great, slow strides. The sound of wings came down like a long, slow bell. It put hair up on the back of Davos' neck, and he had known every frightening noise the sea keeps in her cupboards. At the Tor, the sea drew close to the coast, as if confiding something to the land in the language of depth. The castle sat on a finger of rock, crooked into the water, with watchfires smoldering because a watchman's pride will not let him admit a dawn can make his torch redundant. Beyond it, the coast bent as Davos had said, a trick in stone made long before men thought to lay charts upon boards and pretend to govern water with ink. The convoy showed itself with the carelessness of men who have made this journey at this hour in this season for too long. Square sails, a fat round-bellied cog or two, their bows like drinking men's noses, red with the cold. A half-dozen small coasters with their yards braced a touch odd, signaling they'd been used to hugging land for years. And in the middle, a pair of sleek Tyrell carracks with green and gold fly that could be seen farther than prudence wanted. There, Davos said quietly, and the horn beside him loosed a soft round sound that seemed to make the sea thicken with intent. The oars bit. The longboats leapt the way a poor man will leap to catch a coin dropped from a lord's careless hand. The 8 galleys slid like careful cats. Above and a little ahead, the black dragon stooped and drew a line of smoke upon the air like a calligrapher beginning the first stroke of a big letter. The first carrack saw them and tried to come into the wind. The second saw the dragon and tried to come out of its skin. Men shouted. A boy whose job it was to watch for such on such mornings threw down the speaking trumpet, and covered his head with both hands, like a small priest refusing to watch his god in public. The bronze dragon went low and fast, skimmed the water, then climbed in a gust that hammered the Karak's top hamper into a tangle. The lines went slack, the yard dipped, the sail boomed and snapped. Men cursed in Reach accents. Davos galleys slid into the gap like fish into a net. Hooks flashed pale, ropes arced. The first boarding was clean. Grey Worm over the rail with 3 beside him. A neat scissor of movements. A hand that disarmed without making a speech on the subject of better ways to live. One of Stannis' knights. Sir Imry's cousin, or some such a Davos had never bothered to learn the name of, managed to catch his boot on a coil and nearly go headlong into a coil of his own. Recovered with a graceless flail, and cut a rope with an anger that would have kept. Serve him in a prayer. Lower your flag, Davos bellowed through a trumpet that had seen too much salt and not enough polish. Lower your flag and you keep your lives and your ship. Lower and live. Lions were brave when drunk. Roses were cautious when wet. The green and gold came down as if the man holding it had decided this was a good day to concede to physics. On the smaller boats, some reached for poles and pushed in panicked silence, trying to break a path in water that had become thick with dragon breath and fear. The pale dragon dropped like daydream snow and hovered, its mouth opening without fire, its throat making that long depth chime sound that told the body it was very small and very meat. Down with it, Davos shouted again, and the flags went down. The second Karak had a braver captain. He held up, shook his fist at a dragon as if fighting his father, then picked 2 men to lash the tiller down and went below to fetch, no doubt. Some symbol that meant he would die correctly. The black dragon answered by letting a ribbon of flame unroll from its mouth like a banner at a tourney. It did not touch wood. It did not need to. Heat came like a cloak flung too close, and men ducked as if ducking could make their hair forget to crispen. The brave captain came up again with a sword his grandfather had never sharpened, saw his crew making frightened bargains with their gods, and lowered his flag with a motion that was purely functional, and therefore decent. Take crews' names, Davos told Missandei, who had found her way into a longboat with a calm that would have been pleasing in a 10-year-old, and was startling in a girl who had spent most of her childhood counting men by the number of scars on their backs. We'll feed them and set them ashore well, within walking of a well. No man carries a flogging mark for being frightened of a thing with a furnace in its chest. Bendowind. She dipped her stylus and wrote in neat, small carrot-crowned letters, while the sea set its small slap against hulls, and the dragons turned slow circles above like unlikely gulls. Grey Worm's men lifted bales as easy as children who had spent their lives lifting heavier ones. Stannis' men shouted back and forth with Reachmen, and did not, to Davos' relief, turn swaggering around and thump their chests to the rhythm of easy victory. He had the impression, watching his king's men and the queen's together, that there existed between them a compact invisible but sensible as any line on a chart. We will not shame each other while the other is watching. The loot, if grain for hungry bellies can be called that, piled high in the galleys' bellies and the largest of the longboats. They took dried beans and sacks of barley, a hold full of oats that had been meant for horses who would now not ride into small folks' courtyards like lords. They found 2 barrels of arbor gold which Davos sent back to the ship without comment. Wine was for a night when men could afford it. Today was for bread. On the beach north of the Tor, where a river's mouth made a place even a tired man could love, they set the crews ashore in 2s and 3s, gave them bread and a drink that was not poisoned, and did something men rarely do with men they have beaten before midday. They told them why. We are going north, Jorah Mormont told a Reachman with a nose that would never be pretty again after whatever it had done to offend whatever fist. To fight a thing you haven't seen yet, but that will make you forget summer if you live. You will thank us for eating your bread before we are done with it. Or your grandchildren will. None. The Reachman spat, decided to keep what phlegm he had left on principle, and shrugged. If you kill some lions while you're killing the snow, I won't weep, he said. He had the calm of a man who has seen 2 wars pass like weather over his fields. and learned they cannot be stopped by shouting, only endured by not being where swords are. He took a second piece of bread for the man beside him, who was still too busy looking at where a dragon had stopped the air to remember he was hungry. When they came back to Dragonstone with holds low and men upright, the island smelled different. The kitchen smoked with purpose. The small folk from the village, the stubborn, dark-eyed folk who live by rock and fish and boys' luck, came with baskets and hard faces, and lined to receive measured portions that were not charity, but pay for mending nets, for hauling, for standing with poles where poles needed to be held. Selisa stood at a window with her hands clasped, as if she had found herself accidentally in a story where someone else's god fed folk, and was trying not to let her mouth show that the sight moved what she called soul, and what Davos would have called a decent gut. Men are quieter when they are chewing, Stannis said in the painted hall, while they marked the ships they had taken with little stones of pale wood Missandei had found in a drawer and cut into neat squares. It is almost like prayer, for not making noise. It is what prayer hopes to be, said Daenerys. That actually feeds. It is not the only sort of prayer, Melisandre said from her shadow chair by the brazier. Fire feeds. Fire purifies. Fire has had a good year of hearing its own name, Stannis said curtly. It can sit quiet for an afternoon. The Red Woman sank back with that slight bend of head that meant either acquiescence or delay. It was always both. Davos resisted the old urge to put his hand to his knife and feel the hilt under his palm. The knife he wanted would never sit harmless at his belt. They moved to the next notch in the day's plan, with that tired efficiency that belongs to men and women who have worked from dark to dark long enough to be made of the stuff. Storm's End on the map was a small outline. In memory it filled a boy's life, until there was nothing left that did not smell like old salt and a candle that had burned too long. Davos had brought onions through that belly once. He had watched men cry over potatoes like brides. Now he drew a line from the place where the sea bit the rock to the postern under the waterline. There, he said to Stannis and Daenerys and the small company they trusted to look at such things, there's a spillway and a day's work of a row north of the main gate. Low water gives you a glimpse of it if you know where to stare. A man with a longboat, a quiet oar, a line, and a son to speak the lie can come up under it like a fish. I did not teach many that trick. Then? You kept it? Stannis asked, not quite suspicious, not quite grateful. All these years? I am a smuggler, Davos said mildly. We keep secrets because sometimes they feed us later. Daenerys bent until her hair almost brushed the Carver's River, and peered at the place as if her regard alone would make the stone remember being a wet wall. If a dragon were to hang above the seaward face, she began. No, Stannis said at once. If a dragon will hang, it will hang high. I know Storm's End's bolt throwers. The Florents built some of them. They will put a quarrel into your beast's wing, and you will fall into a wave. There is no honor, I am short of that. I need that in my inventory. I do not trade in honor, Daenerys said. I trade in ends. But I will not throw good lives to how men measure their worth. We will do as the Onion Knight says. We will take the spillway. Grey Worm stood and watched the painted coast steadily, as if willing the spilled paint to rise into walls again. Unsullied can swim, he said, but armor sinks. We go without. Knives only. We are enough. Then you'll have Mormont and 3 men who know how to move like water, Davos said. And 2 of my old mates who owe me and pay incompetence. I will come. My hands still know which stones to grab. If they don't, I'll let go faster. Stannis' mouth thinned. Your queen will not like our plans, he told Daenerys without turning his head. They will feel like theft to her. I have stolen cities from men who claimed they had bought them, Daenerys said. I do not fear a little honest theft, darling, to poor men's pride. Go by your gate. I will bring my dragons to the sunset side and teach the archers to look the wrong way for a quarter hour. That is what I can give you, and still sleep. Then, they went at dusk, when the light does a thing to distance, and makes it impossible to tell how far a boat is from a rock, or a man from his shadow. The sea there had a habit of speaking in a voice so soft and persuasive a man could drown listening to it. Davos took long strokes with his good hand, and his stump set to the oar's leather, the old calluses prickling as if they remembered their reasons. Jorah Mormont rowed opposite, and the two of them kept a rhythm without breaking a word upon the water. Grey Worm and 3 Unsullied lay flat in the boat's belly, a line coiled like a sleeping snake under one man's hand. Behind them, 2 king's men Davos trusted more than names, old, quiet, fond of their wives, and disinclined to die in someone else's lyric, followed in a flat-bottomed skiff. Above and far off, the pale dragon crossed the face of the falling day like a stitch taking a seam. Farther still, the black's shape made a fresh shadow upon older dark. Men upon storm's end seaward wall lifted their heads and forgot to count. That was all Davos asked of dragons, that they teach watchmen to make mistakes. Now, he whispered, as the rock before them took back a little water with a sigh. He felt under the surface with his oar's blade, and found the notch. The skiff slid closer. The Unsullied moved as one body. Silent. No wasted water with their limbs. They did not cast off their knives as foolish men do to die clean. They went into the sea with their hands upon their weapons, and swam like things that had always lived in salt. Davos went last because that is the rule. The man in charge is either first or last, and he had learned which bought him better eyes. The cold took him with a soft punch. He blew a careful trickle out his nose and let his body reach for the rock, not in haste, but with a kind of shy, patient courtship, as if the stone were a woman who would be offended by a rough hand. His fingers found old holds. He climbed. He felt the line go taut below, as Grey Worm reached the lip of the spillway, hooked his arm, and pulled himself up with a motion that might have been prayer, if prayer had been useful in water. They worked in silence. Knives pried. Wet hands found iron. A man inside the postern murmured to himself, and didn't hear what he should have heard, because a dragon's wing beat, far over his head, made a drum of the air, and put a rhythm in his blood that made him poor at listening. Grey Worm's weight shifted. He slipped. The line held. Jorah's hand shot up and found a hold before gravity could find a mistake and make it endemic. A small sound of scuff on stone, too small to be more than a mouse, found the inside of the postern and made the man turn his head. Davos moved, as he had moved in another life, when the cargo is slipping and the man with the lantern has turned to scratch where men scratch. He put his hand under, found the rock, eased the weight. The silence closed like a mouth. Then they were through, and the gate loosened, and the hinge offered with a mouse's squeal that could have been a gull to an unromantic man. The Unsullied slid in. Jorah's foot made no sound. The 2 old king's men were up and over, and gone down the ladder on the inward side to open the chain on the outer gate. The postern drank them like a mouth drinking at a saucer. Inside, Storm's End had the same smell it had had when Davos had done this under a different star. Whetstone, old tallow, a memory of onions that would never leave his own nose even if no one else remembered it. He moved 3 paces as he had taught himself in that old bad siege. Not too quick when men are expecting quick. Not too slow when men are expecting fear. He passed a door and heard sleep beyond. He passed a second and heard men whispering about dragons as if they themselves had grown scaled tongues and could not stop the word from licking their lips. They came at last to the inner sally. That door was barred, oiled, mean. It had been made new when Stannis held the castle last, by men who loved tough work. Jorah looked to Davos. Davos looked to Grey Worm. Grey Worm put a blade into the small space between bar and keep and applied a pressure that was not human so much as patient. The wood did the thing wood will do when a better will asks it to. And until it remembers it is a tree and not a person. It shifted, it squeaked, it consented. The bar lifted. Davos pulled, and the door opened upon a corridor lit with 2 dim rushes. At the far end, a boy no older than some of Davos' boys had been turned to look back and saw, for the first time in his life, men he had never expected to see coming from a place he had never been taught to fear. He opened his mouth. Jorah was across the space to him in 3 steps and covered it with a hand. "Shh," he said into the boy's hair, and the boy, whose breath smelled of onions too, because there are some practical pieties all castles keep, went still as if told a story that asked for it. By then, it was done. The outer gate groaned, the chain slackened. The smaller posterns in the shadow of the seaward face whispered. The quays beyond, narrow, cut into the rock like a miser's indulgence, accepted the noses of Stannis longboats. Men with Baratheon stags upon their chests, but dragon shadow on their faces, came up in a tide. In the yard, a lion banner stirred, as if remembering it had been left out in the damp. It came down not with a defiant jerk, but with a gentleness that told the truth. This had never been a place eager to wear that sigil. It had only considered itself practical to do so. A captain of the garrison, broad-shouldered, with honest fear making him raw, met Stannis and Daenerys under the watch of the drum tower. He held a sword hilt first. He had wrapped the hilt in cloth, as if the metal might otherwise shame his hand. "My lord," he said to Stannis, "because there is a way men greet the rightful Lord of Storm's End that even lions cannot teach them to forget. My lady," he added to Daenerys after a beat, "because there is another way men are learning to speak to a woman with a dragon and a law in her face." Stannis took the sword. Daenerys did not require him to hand it to her. "Your men?" Stannis asked. "Hungry," said the captain. "Tired. Most of them from the marches, and not pleased to be so far from their wives. The Tyrells sent biscuit, and then forgot to send the men to take their place. We were told if we lost the castle, Lord Mace would have us flayed and put our skins on the wall." He glanced up at the wall, where gargoyles drooled see, and looked offended at the notion of wearing men. "I do not think there are enough walls in the reach for all the skins his threats ask for." Daenerys' mouth made that corner shift again that signaled almost humor. "You will not be flayed," she said. "You will be fed and given leave to go home when we can spare you, with letters saying you did the honorable thing. If Lord Mace likes to read, he will have something to do with his afternoons. Then, you will not be punished for not dying," Stannis said, flat because he refused to court men with comforts they should expect as rights. "The law has no need to eat itself on that point." The captain swallowed. "Thank you," he said, "because old ways do not burn away like chaff. They must be untaught with gifts as well as scoldings." The men behind him let their shoulders go down at last. Some of them cried, ridiculous as it seemed to anyone who had not been tired at the very hinge of a holdfast. They took Storm's End the way a man takes a stool at the end of the day, with a sound of breath and a small grimace at the memory of older pains. Stannis walked the yard and the parapets, as if checking a horse's teeth. He stopped under the gatehouse and pressed a palm to a stone that had a barely visible smoothness about it, a place where a boy's shoulders had leaned often. Davos watched him and did not intrude. The king's face was empty. He would not let memory come out of its stable. He had work. Daenerys stood in the great hall where the stag banners had once hung, and where now no banners hung but old salt stains. She touched nothing. She did not sit. Missandei stood at her side, slate ready, as if summoning into being a treaty wherever Daenerys' attention rested. Shireen made a careful circuit until she found the small window where, as a story her father had told her hinted, a Seaworth once signaled a night for onions. She pressed her forehead to the cool stone and smiled as if greeting an old hero. "Storm's End was my home," Stannis said at last. The words dropped like stones. "It has never been comfortable. It has been faithful. I wish to die in it when there is time." "You will not die today," Daenerys said. "There is not time." "No." He looked at her then, as one craftsman looks at another whose work he does not like, but cannot say is shoddy. "Your beasts did what you promised. They frightened men without burning men." "Nah. They did it because I asked, and because the wind allowed it," Daenerys said. "I will not promise it twice as if it were a thing a baker does with yeast." "Bread again," Stannis murmured, as if the gods were determined to make every metaphor a loaf. "Very well. We have it. We hold it. We will move." "Then no." From the corner, Melisandre said, gentle as a song, "I saw in the flames a great blue eye opening upon a field of white, and knowing nothing it saw. I saw a stag standing firm and a woman with 3 shadows who turned and would not flee. I saw a wall with cracks that did not show until men struck them with their breath. I saw. Gya. Ishal. Ja. You always see, Stannis said. It was not kind and not unkind. I would like you, for an hour, to hear. The girl has told me of a man in black at the top of the world who needs bread and men. I believe the girl on this, not because she is a queen, but because she is a smuggler of truths. We will send a ship with a letter and another with food. A man in black, Melisandre echoed, eyes half shut. Black can be either ash or night. It will be wool with lice in it, Davos said. And a man with no time for your cleverness reading over a wall by a candle he lit with a curse. Send to the wall, Daenerys said. And send me a copy of what you send. I will add my seal. The Watch may care little for it, but men are men even when they say they are not. A seal is a comfort when you are cold. Ben? Stannis' mouth flattened. Do not be generous on Storm's End's behalf, he said. I will decide how much goes and how quickly, but give your seal. Missandei wrote, as if writing created what men insisted upon, and perhaps it did. Her hand made neat the prospect that had once been prophecy, and now became a list of barrels, casks, wormy ship's biscuit, letters for a Lord Commander no one had seen here, and orders to a captain named Porridge, Tom, who had a way with bad weather and worse men. When the day had been eaten down to bones, and the matter of where to put whose men in which tower and how to keep Lannister spies from running out through the village had been spoken of until no one could be surprised by a new lie, they took breath, because bodies require it, even when kingdoms do not. In the small garden that Storm's End indulged itself, a strip of earth with wind-blasted herbs, and a stubborn pear tree that had the look of a ship holding against weather. Shireen sat with Daenerys and read again, this time from a small mended book, whose stitching Davos recognized because his fingers had made it last year at some unmentioned mercy. It says here, Shireen said, touching a woodcut where a dragon curled itself around stylized mountains, that the first dragons drank molten rock, but that does not make sense. Rock does not drink. Dragons breathe air. Even I know that. Septa says men write foolish things when they are afraid or when they want someone else to be afraid. Mendoza. Septa is wise, Daenerys said, and the wind laid a piece of hair across her cheek like a ribbon. In the cities where I burned chains, men wrote books about me before I could read them. They said I ate infants for breakfast, and my dragons ate their mothers for supper. I ate bread, and my dragons ate goats. She glanced toward the wall where Drogon had stretched himself along the sun-warmed stone like a cat, and drummed his tail in slow, content thuds. Mostly. Does he miss home? Shireen asked, eyes big and guileless as only a child's can be when the question is the only important thing in the room. He is home when he is near a high place in the sky, Daenerys said. He does not keep maps. Men do. Shireen nodded, as if that was a thing one could learn to do if one practiced. I can make a map, she said. Off where I am brave. There are rooms where I am brave, and rooms where I am not. She traced a finger through the dirt where the pear tree's root broke the surface. I am brave on walls. I am not brave in the dark part of the cellars where I think I hear the sea moving. Nah. The sea is always moving, Daenerys said. It is loud when you listen for it. I like when it is loud. Shireen said, it sounds like a giant breathing. That is silly. It is what it is, Daenerys said. When I was a child, I slept in houses that moved because they had wheels and no walls, because I had none. I learned to lie still and listen to the wind and pretend it was my mother talking softly. That is silly too, and it kept me alive, because a child who cries in a man's house does not ride very long. Then Sao. Shireen looked at her for a long time with a gaze that made the grayscale on her cheek just a fact, and nothing like a badge of harm. Will you make my father less alone? She asked in the voice that belongs to 9 and to no other age. He is always alone even when he is not. Daenerys did not answer quickly. The pear leaves made a sound like small hands clapping. I will not make him less himself, she said at last. But I will stand where the wind hits him, so that he does not have to stand there every hour of every day. If he lets me. He will not like that I asked, Shireen said, and smiled a little crooked brave smile. He says I must learn not to ask people for things it embarrasses them to give. He is right, Daenerys said. And you may ask me because I am not embarrassed by work. When she left the garden, Drogon lifted his head and made that stone-shifting sound again. She put her hand upon his jaw and felt the scale and the heat under it, and thought of the way men sometimes turn their faces aside to keep the light from the eyes. Not today, she told him, because queens lie to beasts when they must to keep their own hearts from mischief. Tomorrow we will fly. They did not fly the next day. Men flew instead, upon rumor and fear, and letters that ran like rabbits. A fisher, out of Claw Isle, came with a tale of longships off Crackclaw Point, black as fishermen's oaths, and twice as hard to shake. A raven from the east brought a neat, frost-brittle hand, Tycho Nestoris, and the sum of it was the sum of all bankers' notes. We lent, you showed you were not foolish, now we will lend again, but do not mistake generosity for weakness. Stannis read it with an expressionless face, and put it down with precise hands, as if not to smudge the numbers might make them more favorable. Scholar's hand writes from the wall. Missandei reported 2 hours later. A second raven shivering upon the mew's perch, as if appalled by the air in this war-heavy place. A Lord Commander, whose name is John, writes that the cold has walked and been met and turned for a time, but that it remembers its road. He asks for glass candles, dragon glass. Is that what is meant? And men with long patience. Now, John, Daenerys said softly, as if tasting a story she had not yet been given. Send both. If we have glass, he shall have it. If not, we shall find it, because it is said to come from fire, and I have more fire than I have patience. Men with patience are rarer than dragons. True, Stannis said without looking up. His quill made that raspy sound oathbreakers must hear in their sleep. By afternoon they had Storm's End talking like a holdfast again. Soup smells, the clink of harness, a man cursing in the yard at a mule that had opinions. The dragons took turns upon the parapets like cumbersome sentries that no officer would dare inspect. Selisa walked the hall with a prayer rope slipping through her fingers and looked with loathing at the impious pair. Melisandre watched the dragons as if they were altars that moved and accepted that they would not kneel to her. Davos stood upon a wall in a wind and felt his scars itch, which is what scars do when a man starts to believe he has done more than keep himself alive. They moved again on the third day because men who mean to keep a war must move or else become historical. The gullet waited like a throat with teeth. Word had reached that lion ships were making sure the straits stayed theirs, fat with pride and careless with math. The painted table wore a scatter of stones where Driftmark sits and Dragonstone hooks, and smaller ones where some men's hopes once did. They would test there what allegiance could mean when a queen's dragons drifted far above, and a king's galleys cut low and salt. The morning they sailed, Shireen came to the quay with her book under her arm, and her chin up like any man too young to own a beard. You will not drown, she told Davos as if it were a thing she could give with words. It is not a good day for it. It is never a good day, Davos said, and some days the sea forgets her manners anyway. I will come back to hear what nonsense your next book says about fish. Nah. It may say the sea is a woman, Shireen said. The Septa says she is. She is, Davos said, and the worst of them, for she remembers and will not forgive, but the best too, because she feeds men who have sense. He bowed to her as if she were queen and felt, as he always felt, the weight of the small light head above its scar, like a votive he had not fashioned and could not guard against wind. Keep the queen out of Melisandre's hooks. She will keep herself, Shireen said. She is like father. She saves other people the trouble of keeping her. Davos laughed and went down into the boat and took the oar and let the sea make its case. The day opened like a fist. It would not stay open long. It never did. He looked up and saw the black dragon rise like a piece of night that had not yet learned surrender. saw the Pale One glide like a thought through a calculating head, saw the bronze lift and fall with a rhythm that reminded him of men at oars who know the distance and do not lie to themselves about it. Behind him, on the quay, Stannis Baratheon and Daenerys Targaryen stood close enough for a third to pass between. Not closer. Their cloaks tugged by the same wind and their faces turned to the same horizon for a day. That was as close as law and fire needed to stand before the work could begin again. The oars took hold. The island fell behind them, old, black, keeping its counsel. The water ahead shivered with light. The whistle still hung at Missandei's belt, bright as silver fish, waiting to tell men to do the thing they had resolved to do already. The world breathed its long breath. The story did not hurry. It had waited for years. It could wait for one more morning without losing itself.